Okay. Keep it out there that this is the only time you're ever going to hear me talk about this day because this versus fits it really well. Now, I had an idea to do this a while back, and we thought we'd actually add an extra verses to the week in order to do it on the actual day. So, everyone knows my opinion on everything. I'm doing this because this is one that needs to be done. These are the two romance movies. And it makes total sense that this would probably be the one that actually goes on the actual day of romance. So, we're going to see what happens when you take two award-winning epics that are the quintessential romance film. And since it says romance theme on Versus this month anyway, we're going to see what happens when Casablanca faces off against Gone with the Wind. AJ, take it away.
Yeah, that's pretty much the only thing these two have in common.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is kind of they're both that marriage is in the way of love, other two love thing. They're both kind of do that thing, but that's pretty much all they have in common. A lot of movies do that, so it doesn't really stand out as that particular setup. It's just basically that when you hear about romance movies, it's generally these two. We already did Titanic and The Notebook months ago, so we jumped the gun on that. So
that should have been the one for the 14th for last year. But we didn't start doing it until after the fact, so couldn't have done that.
So I shall do my best to review the two quintessential. Not only are they quintessential for the romance genre, but just when you think of classic movies in general. More
Very
or
true.
less.
You're going to Ben Stein the situation.
I shall do my best, yes. I will begin with Gone with the Wind. Obviously, the big difference between these two is the lengths.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hard... If you're going to judge which one you like better, that's kind of hard to say because you might be tempted to say Gone with the Wind because it's the epic, or you might be tempted to say Casablanca because it's the one that's not 4 hours. It's only an hour 42, I think. You could watch Casablanca almost 3 times, and you would have the length of Gone with the Wind. Yeah. So, actually, I think if you watch Casablanca about 2 times, you're about there. So, but we're going to start with Gone with the Wind as reviewing them separately. The plot is, there's not really a specific plot for Gone with the Wind. You have like 5 different things going on throughout the movie. That's why it's so long. But the main story is Scarlett O'Hara is trying to really, really, really simplify it. The story of Gone with the Wind is the 2 men in Scarlett O'Hara's life. The 2 men. She's got a billion of them, but the 2 main men in her life. There's Rhett Butler, who wants her, but she's kind of shunning because she wants Ashley Wilkes, who is Leslie Howard, who was a great actor that unfortunately his career was cut short because he was in World War II, I think, and he was in a plane that was shot down. So needless to say, his career didn't go past the 40s, unfortunately. But that's in real life, by the way, in case there was confusion. Because he is in the war in this, but it's the Civil War, obviously. So, and she wants Ashley Wilkes, but Ashley Wilkes is married, of course. And she spends the whole movie trying to push Red away and trying to win Ashley over. And things don't exactly go that way. To put that movie in the simplest terms possible. But the way this all starts out is we meet Scarlett, and she's basically this. They live on Tara, which is the plantation that her family owns, the cotton plantation. And she's basically their bratty daughter that's basically what she's just your average bratty daughter. She expects everything to go her way, and she's, wants to find love with the one guy. Literally, every single guy that pretty much meets her wants her, and she wants the one that doesn't do that. You have like the very first scene is these two brothers fighting over her, and one of the brothers is actually George Reeves from the Superman TV show. So we see her fighting over them fighting over her, and then we have this other character who is Ashley is marrying his cousin, and then you have who is it? It's the cousin Melanie, who is Olivia Dowland. She is her brother, I think, is the one that ends up marrying Scarlett. Her brother Charles. Well, basically to get Ashley's attention, she decides that Charles proposes to her and she says yes. Just so she can say, hey, Ashley, look what you're missing out on, to put it in more modern terms. Well, Charles goes off to war and dies immediately. And he doesn't even die as a war hero. He dies of pneumonia. Poor bad luck Charles.
Bad luck, Charlie.
So, but before all this, she meets Rhett Butler at this big gathering. And he's basically a visitor from Charleston who was shunned by his own family. And the way they start off is she sees him from it's a famous shot. She sees him at the bottom of the stairs, and he's just doing his thing, his Gable thing. And he'd already won his Oscar for It Happened One Night by this point. And he basically most of his characters from then on were basically variations as a character from It Happened One Night. Most people say his characters were variations of Rhett Butler, but his character in It Happened One Night was actually 5 years prior, and that's basically what he was doing. It just works so well, he managed to get away with it, which is perfectly fine. But anyway, so they basically have their first meeting when Red has just kind of disappeared. And so she takes Ashley into this room that she thinks is empty. And she confesses in this big Vivian Lee scene, she confesses her love to him. But he says, I can't do that because I love Melanie and I'm going to marry Melanie. And then she has this big breakdown when he leaves, and she picks up this vase, I guess. I can't really tell what it is. And she throws it in, it breaks against the bookshelf. And she wakes up. She doesn't really wake up, but she draws attention to Rhett, who was behind the couch that was facing away from them the whole time, and he heard everything. And there's the funny line where after he avoids the breaking glass, his response is, has the war started yet? That very Gable delivery. And then he realizes that this whole Ashley scenario, and he basically says that he's drawn to her like every guy in the world is. And he says, once you finally get over this Ashley Wilkes thing, I'm gonna sweep you off your feet. And of course she says, I doubt it, and leaves him there. So the movie continues, and the reason she marries Charles basically is because of Ashley's sister India. She basically it's basically a simplification of all this fawning over Scarlett thing, which is India makes a comment about how nobody sees Scarlett as the marrying type. They just want to flirt with her and then they'll be on their way. And Melanie is more of the marrying type. Which hurts even more because her and Melanie are really close. So she just kind of has to sit back and deal with Ashley going off with Melanie and having children, etc. And then there we go into after Charles has bitten the dust. She's still in mourning. She's still in the black dress. And then Rhett makes a surprise appearance, and they do one of those like parties where you bid money for like charity to get a woman to dance with you. It's like prostitution, only it's dancing instead of sex.
It's like Groundhog Day.
Pretty much. And then of course, there's always they're hoping it leads to that, but they're paying for the dance. So of course, Rhett bids a obscene amount of money to dance with Scarlett. And they continue their whole, I'm going to sweep you off your feet, and she says, oh, no, you're not thing. Because all this time has passed, she still wants Ashley. So, then the problem is she is sent off to the Hamilton's house after the Battle of Gettysburg starts to break out. So she basically has to live in the same area as Ashley and Melanie, which of course is only making this worse. But eventually this leads to her wanting to go back to Tara. So basically Rhett offers her a ride back there. But the problem starts to break out because Rhett is going to join the army and basically only take her halfway. But then we have the big scene with our first of many extremely famous sweeping black silhouette orange background shots that this movie is famous for. Where they finally have their first big kiss when he leaves her there. Which is, Red and Scarlet have this really weird relationship because he's basically, she kind of somewhat maybe subconsciously wants it, but he's more or less forcing it on her. So it's kind of hard to tell who wants what and what's, you know. But anyway, and we'll get to rape later, don't worry. There's a couple of attempted rapes. In this, I shit you not, is rated G, because that's the way the rating system was back then. There are 2 attempted rapes and somebody gets shot in the face, and the movie's rated G, but don't worry about that because that's the way the rating system was. So after Rhett goes off to the army and abandons her, she finally makes her way back to Tara, only to find that the city's basically been burned down and Tara has been deserted. Tara's still there, but it's been deserted completely. And she finds that her mom is dead. So that's when we have our first, well, that's the thing about Gone with the Wind, is pretty much every scene in the movie is famous. Which is almost every scene, which is really impressive for a movie that's 4 hours long. But that's after her mom dies and she realizes that Tara has practically been destroyed. She has the big moment where she says, as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. And we do our first, it's kind of bookended with this. It goes into, that's the end of the first part. It goes into the intermission after we do the giant zoom out. And you see her silhouette as she's, proclaiming that. Because that's also very similar to the last shot of the movie. I think it might actually be the same shot, I think. I don't know for sure. But they use it to bookend it, because her saying, I'll never be hungry again, takes us into the intermission. And sure enough, the second part shows us that, yeah, she told us by any means necessary she wasn't going to be hungry again, and she meant it. Because Scarlett has basically turned into this, to put it mildly, by any means necessary kind of person. And they show us this immediately, that she has changed, because what I was talking about just a second ago, a deserter comes into the house and attempts to rob her and rape her. And to retaliate, she shoots him in the face and kills him. So we immediately know this probably isn't the bratty little girl that was looking for love in the first part of the movie. And now she is hell-bent on making herself as rich and happy as possible. Whatever that is. So then it basically turns out, remember Bad Luck Charles? We basically have Bad Luck Scarlet for a really long time here. Because there's that attempted rape. Then there's a point where Ashley actually confesses maybe he does. Maybe there is a mutual feeling there. And they finally kiss for the first time. But then he drops it and says, I can't do this because I won't leave Melanie. And then, if that's not enough, her dad falls off his horse and dies. And, if that's not enough, she realizes that she can't pay her taxes. So she decides, of course, who's the one person that really wants her. She's going to go to Red and get money from him to pay her taxes with. However, Red Red is in jail, and his bank accounts are blocked, so he can't give her the money that she needs. So, what finally happens is she goes and her sister, Sue Ellen. Her sister Sue Ellen is married to this guy named Frank Kennedy, who owns a store and a lumber mill. So, because Scarlett has developed this by any means necessary attitude, she goes to Frank Kennedy and she says, Sue Ellen doesn't love you anymore, she was tired of waiting for you, and she went and married somebody else. Which is a complete lie. So in turn, Scarlett marries Frank Kennedy so she can inherit his lumberyard and his store and be rich. Which works. She becomes filthy rich off this, basically. And just to make matters worse, she blackmails Ashley into running the mill for her. So this eventually leads to... because this is what happens when you marry Scarlett O'Hara, tragedy strikes. Scarlett goes into the town by herself and almost gets raped again. Almost gets gang raped this time. So she goes back and they're all going to raid the town. Shock surprise, Frank Kennedy gets himself killed. So Scarlett O'Hara is a widow yet again. So Frank Kennedy is barely dead. And finally, Rhett Butler proposes to her. And because she absolutely needs somebody to basically... Number one, she's still, after all this time, hung up on Ashley. So she basically needs to, I guess, stay married. To basically... Because she thinks she's getting at him in some way. So she says yes to marrying Rhett Butler. Now, you know when Scarlett O'Hara gets married, something bad always happens. Rhett Butler doesn't die. However, they do have a child. I think Bonnie is her name. So, she marries Rhett while still wanting Ashley, and then she has Rhett's baby. But the problem is because of this still wanting Ashley thing, she refuses to have any more of Rhett's babies, and she doesn't want to share a bed with him. She basically used him to spawn this child and be married. Because she won't divorce him. However, you could call this maybe karma on Scarlett. They don't really spell that out, but you could probably say so. Little innocent Bonnie is out riding her pony and jumping holes and shit like you normally do. And there is an accident and Bonnie is killed. So, yeah, this is where Scarlett's life has gotten her. And poor Rhett is now heartbroken by Scarlett, and his daughter's dead. And so Scarlett is in mourning because of this. And the bad luck streak continues. Melanie drops in. And since Melanie is a fantastic friend, she's going to stay to comfort them in their time of mourning. Trouble is Melanie's working on her second pregnancy. And she's already been warned by her doctors that this pregnancy could kill her. So, poor little innocent good friend Melanie comes over with her second pregnancy and says, I'm here to comfort you. I'm going to be a great friend. And while pregnant, Melanie collapses and dies. So Ashley is free reign now. But the problem is Scarlett also suffers a miscarriage. Because they try to have another child again. I think the miscarriage is what led to her saying, I'm never going to have your babies again, and stuff like that. And I'm never going to share your bed because I love Ashley, basically. So finally, we get to the big climax. Probably the most famous scene in movie history. Probably. Like, I don't even know what rivals it. Except maybe... Okay. And maybe Orson Welles saying Rosebud and dropping the snow globe. I I almost said hourglass for some reason. So finally, we've reached the big climax. And finally, after all this death, after being with Melanie on her deathbed, it finally occurs to Scarlett, oh my God, I love Rhett, and Ashley doesn't love me, so I'm done with Ashley. But by this point, like any sane person, Rhett is packing his shit. And Rhett is getting ready to leave Tara for good. So Scarlett runs up and confesses, oh my God, Rhett, I've loved you all this time, and I'm never going to be with Ashley, but that's okay, because I have you, Rhett. So Rhett puts on his hat, he's got his suitcase, and Rhett says he's going out the door and never coming back. And Scarlett says, where will I go? What will I do? And Rhett says his line. And disappears into the fog, into the abyss, never to be seen again. And our last shot is Scarlett on the steps, basically saying she's going to get Rhett back no matter what, and she's going to win his love over again. And she's basically in the position that Rhett was at the start of this. But given all the shit that went down, I wish her the best of luck winning his love back. But she's confident because of tomorrow. And that line. And that line takes us to the sweeping silhouette over orange shot one more time as the theme to the movie kicks in. And we have our big ending. And that, in a nutshell, is the epicness that is Gone with the Wind. Took me 21 minutes. So, that in itself is what makes Gone with the Wind so beloved, is how epic of a story it is and how you get to see, because the way, when you watch Gone with the Wind multiple times, you see it from different perspectives every time. Like, sometimes you can see it from, like, normally people who see it for the first time see it simply as a Civil War movie with a love story in its center. But most people realize that I think the main purpose is that it's Scarlett's story. And because there's some people that see it from Rhett's perspective too. But I think you can possibly see it as a movie from Rhett's perspective. You can possibly see it as a Civil War movie that has a love story at its center. But I think the main thing is that it is Scarlett's story and everything that happens to her. And how she affects the things that happen around her. And how you can basically maybe not blame everything with the way she became on her because she was kind of, the bratty daughter at the beginning, but so much shit happened in her life to get her to at the point where we leave her on the steps and she's proclaiming that she's going to win Rhett back. A lot took her to get to that place, so you could analyze forever on whether or not the choices she makes are her own fault or she's just a product of her environment. It's probably a combination of both, if I had to guess, if I had to throw my opinion in there. And you have all these memorable people. Obviously, it won 2 acting Oscars, along with 8 others, by the way, including picture, of course. And it's also worth noting that the director, Victor Fleming, did The Wizard of Oz the same year. The same guy directed The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind in the same year. Just imagine that. Having that accomplishment. I can't remember if it was this one or the other one, but he had I think it was Gone with the Wind. He had an assistant director or something. That I think is a famous name, but I can't put my finger on it.
The strange thing about that comparison is the fact that the Great Movie Ride at Disney's Hollywood Studios, it ends in The Wizard of Oz. Originally, it was supposed to end with Gone with the Wind. So that's a nice little PS out there.
So you have, as we talked about in the Streetcar review, Vivien Leigh is considered one of the best actresses of all time. Especially if you talk to any actual working actress, they will also tell you how heavily inspired they were by Vivien Leigh. the problem with that nowadays is, Vivian Lee's acting style is extremely dated nowadays, but there's still a lot to have, like, be beloved from her performances, particularly this one. So, while it is her performance, I guess you could say her performance style is dated, but her performances themselves can be timeless, if that makes sense. And as we talked about, this is basically everybody, even though It Happened One Night was his Oscar win and was also a movie that won Best Picture, people tend to see when they think Clark Gable, they think this. They think Gone with the Wind and Red. Because this is basically kind of the persona that he had throughout most of his career. I haven't seen a shitload of his movies, but he's kind of got that same vibe. Kind of a Cary Grant-esque thing. I don't know which one came before the other. I think he came first. I don't know. They were around the same time period, so. I don't know, come to think of it, Cary Grant might have been a little later. Regardless, it was kind of, okay, he just kind of, like most actors of that era, like Cary Grant, they were able to kind of keep, and Bogart, they were able to keep the same persona, but that same persona works so well in their characters that typecasting your lead actors wasn't necessarily a bad thing back in the day. It gave you you can throw John Wayne in there too, I guess. It gave them what people loved about them. People couldn't get enough of it, so. And you have the other Oscar winner from this movie, which is an interesting story considering we're talking about 1939. Go to what people criticized George Clooney for saying in his acceptance speech about how Hollywood and the Academy did something really out there and gave Hattie McDaniel an Oscar in 1939 for playing the maid. Her name's actually Mammy. And, you know, she's always had this beloved performance, like with the You Can't Show Your Bosom Till 3 o'clock, and I don't know nothing about Birth of No Baby, stuff like that. She's probably the most quoted person in the movie, despite all the memorable quotes from Scarlet and Red. So, yeah. That's pretty much Gone with the Wind in a nutshell. So you can probably see why it's, you know, this big, sweeping, beloved thing. And it's one of those where it's obviously quite a sit, because it's 4 hours long. It's not necessarily a movie you can just say, well, I'm in the mood for that. Let's do it. But it's got this, it doesn't feel like a chore to watch when you're actually watching it. It doesn't feel 4 hours long. But it does feel, it's one of those things where it doesn't feel its length, but you can feel you can feel it in, like, a positive way. Like, it doesn't feel like the movie flies by, because obviously it covers so much time and so much ground. So you feel the story's impact by how you can feel the length the way you should, and not necessarily in a good God, when is it over way. Because really, when you think about it, the movie ends abruptly. So, because for a while there, you don't really, if you're seeing it for the first time, you kind of wonder how it can end. Because eventually it just has to stop. So, yeah, they had, like, there's, like, a mini-series that was, like, supposed to be a sequel to it, I think. But I never saw it. I don't even know what it really is. It's called Scarlet. I have no idea what the story of it is, or if it's anything about... Obviously, this was adapted from the book. I don't know if that was a continuation from something else, or if it's its own thing. I don't know, but I never bothered to watch it. So, after having watched Gone with the Wind, I don't think you need a mini-series to back it up. I think you have enough story for one day. So now we can go on to Casablanca, which is a totally different feel, because Casablanca is the time period of a normal movie. It's an hour 40. It's a fairly simple story, and it's got a beginning, middle, and end. it's got one story going on basically, because you have the they kind of have I wouldn't necessarily call it a MacGuffin, but it's basically what gets the story in motion are these papers that everybody wants. So basically, okay, shit. Awesome. The transition is always weird. It's always like we talked about this movie for like a half an hour. Now we're gonna go right into this movie, and I get thrown off. Okay, so basically we have Rick, who has this bar, and I know it's a weird transition. I'm just kind of okay. So what's bringing all these people together is World War II is happening and Nazis are happening. Once again, I'm very much simplifying it as much as I can. And then you have Rick, who owns this bar, and he's basically this I don't give a shit about anything person. He's drunk constantly. He just sits in his bar and he is basically neutral to everything. He just doesn't care. He's just indifferent. And he also has that bit of resentment in him. But when the movie starts, you don't really know where that's coming from. You think he's probably just kind of a douchebag. But I mean, if you really focus on the character, you do sense that has to be coming from somewhere, and that'll probably be revealed later. Well, obviously, as the name of the play it's based on is called... They were actually going to call the movie this at one point, and that's always a funny anecdote to people. The name of the play is Everyone Comes to Rick's. And that line's actually delivered in the movie by Claude Rains when they're talking about where everything's going to go down, basically. It's clearly based on a play, you can tell. Because it's basically that one setting, mainly. So, and it's really interesting because... Actually, I'll get into that in a second. I'll keep going with this. Obviously, in the midst of all this, Ilsa comes in with Victor Laszlo. And Victor Laszlo is like this war hero. And that's when we learn that it's actually... what's great about this is... like I said, you kind of sense that there's something within... From the perspective of somebody who's never seen it before, you know that something happened in Rick's past, but you have no idea what it is, because they're not even really hinting at it. He's just resentful and drunk. But then when Ilsa comes in, and we see this, we see their reaction to each other, it pretty much all starts to set in motion. And that's what makes it more meaningful, like, when you see it over and over again. Because that one shot where, like, when you first see the movie, you see that they see each other, but you don't really know what the significance is. But when you've seen it multiple times, and you know the history of them, and what happened to them, and what they went through, and everything they did, it makes that shot a lot more meaningful, because you kind of feel it all in that one instance at the same time, kind of like they do. That's what starts off why this love story in particular is so beloved. So, that's basically, yeah, since we're doing the romance theme, the plot itself is kind of... And since basically the romance is what Casablanca is all about, the plot revolving the papers is kind of a side thing. And it's something that nobody ever... Like, when you talk about Casablanca with somebody, like when you bring it up, they'll say like, they'll do all these quotes and they'll talk about, oh my god, that was so romantic. Nobody fucking talks about the plot with the fucking with Peter Lorre bringing in the papers from the black market, selling them and all of that. That's basically just to get the plot to where it needs to go, because the main story is this love story. It was kind of a subplot just to get us to where we need to go. So yeah, you technically could say they're kind of a MacGuffin, except that plot does come together. The plot is important because it's the reason the ending happens the way it does. Because obviously they have to sacrifice their love in order to, like, defeat the Nazis, more or less. That's how big of a deal this love story is. Which prompts It's interesting to think about this, though. Let me talk about how this movie was made, because it brings a real significance to the love story itself. When they were making Casablanca, they had no idea they were making a classic. For that matter, they didn't even know they were making anything that was going to be that good. They just thought they were making some romance movie for Warner Brothers that was going to go in and out of theaters, and everybody would move on with their lives. Apparently, the thing wasn't even completely written. They were adapting from the play. Like, apparently, it was one of those cases where they would write the scene, the script would be shipped to the set that day, and they would do it. I read something very interesting. And like I said, it brings a whole new perspective on the romance itself. About this writing the scenes as they go thing. There was going to be a happy ending, and there was going to be the ending we got. Obviously, the ending we got is Rick basically calls out the idea of a happy ending, and he says that line about it doesn't take much to see that the problems of three little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. And that's why you're getting on that plane. So basically, she has to get on the plane with Victor Laszlo and leave forever, and they're gonna, help end the war and all that shit. Obviously, the original ending was going to be she stays with Rick and Victor Laszlo goes by himself. As I was saying, that line where, they could end the war, he's basically calling out the fact that if they stay together, they could be... They just can't. The way they're... The circumstances and the situation, they just cannot be together, and that's just the way it is. The interesting thing is about the writing the script and then sending it straight to the set that day. When Ingrid Bergman is looking up at Humphrey Bogart and she's acting, because it's basically Ilsa trying to decide whether or not she's going to get on the plane. While they were filming that scene, Ingrid Bergman did not know if Ilsa got on the plane or not. So it just adds a whole new thing to it. Then you have it was like a really small budget, and nobody expected it to become anything. And the thing was, another thing that just makes it really work is, as far as the acting is concerned and how convincing they are. Despite the fact that Ingrid Bergman got nominated for Whom the Bell Tolls instead of this in that year. But anyway, it might have improved her chances of winning if she had run for this, but regardless, basically the whole idea of these characters basically came from the personas of the actors, because that's basically what the writing was built around. Like we were talking about with Gable, about how actors basically did the same thing a lot back in the day, and that's how it worked. Basically, that's actually what made it better. That really saved Casablanca because it made the writing really easy. Because it was pretty much easy because they already had fully developed characters just by the actors themselves. And you have you basically have every... When you look at the AFI list of 100 greatest quotes in movie history, there's about 6 from Casablanca, which is a lot. Most have maybe 2. Like, there's maybe a couple movies that have 2 quotes on there. Casablanca had like 5 or 6. You have, he does not fucking say, play it again, Sam. He says, play it, Sam, play as time goes by. Which is a big scene in itself. This is another one of those, it doesn't have, I don't think it has quite as many memorable scenes as Gone with the Wind does. But Gone with the Wind has about 2.5 hours more to work with than Casablanca does, so... The fact that Casablanca made all of this, made so many famous scenes and so many famous moments and so many just brilliant scenes, in an hour and 40-minute movie and apparently on the fly. No pun intended, because they have to get on the plane. And they have all these memorable characters, like Peter Lorre is always great, and he was basically doing that character that basically he's another actor that did basically the same thing, but it always worked, especially in M. He never was quite as creepy in anything else as he was in M, but a standard was set, and he pretty much always had that creepy vibe about him. And he also added, like, in those, like, it's really interesting how this movie is known as this sweeping romance. It has this big dramatic ending that's, like, heart-wrenching. The first half of the movie is basically a comedy. Like, you have the character like the bartender, and you have Claude Rains is actually kind of a comedic character. Sam has his moments. He's like, he works at the bar. He also he's the only one that like knows Sam Rick and Ilsa's history because he was there in Paris. You have Sidney Greenstreet, who is the club owner. That was good. Who was only on like his second or third movie by this point. Because he was like in his 60s, and his first movie was The Maltese Falcon 2 years before this. I think so. So, that's pretty much... It's so amazing that this beloved movie was made... They basically made a great movie by accident. And it's become what it is just because of... I don't even know. And you have all your... You know, you have Rick's speech at the end. You have We'll Always Have Paris. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Apparently, Here's Looking at You, Kid was improvised by Humphrey Bogart. I don't even know what that phrase means. But just the way he delivers it and the way he's looking at her whenever he says it, you feel like you know what... I mean, I'm sure it has a meaning that probably everybody but me knows, and now I feel stupid, but analyzing it, I have no idea what he means by that. But it's something really romantic, and it really works. Roger Ebert put it really well. I'm pretty sure it was him that said it. Roger Ebert said that Casablanca is basically like a, you talk about movies that never get old. He compared Casablanca to a music album. You can just put it on whenever you feel like it. And you love the same bits. And the more you experience it, the more things you find to love about it. There's no possible way you could see Casablanca more than once and it ever gets worse. So, that's pretty much Casablanca in a nutshell. Now, as far as choosing between the two, it's really hard to say because, like I said, one is a very simple movie that's basically about a love story with one plot going on to kind of drive it. And Gone with the Wind is this big sweeping thing that has one internal love triangle in the middle of it, but there's so much that goes on that they put the love triangle into, and we see how it dissolves and then re-evolves and just is this ongoing thing. But I think as far as being able to... Casablanca's shorter runtime is really impressive because it basically became as famous as Gone with the Wind and is considered as great without having to have done the whole... Because Gone with the Wind is more of an experience where it's the whole sweeping sitting in a theater for 4 hours thing. And Casablanca is just like a normal movie. Like I said, they just... Gone with the Wind is this big, massive fucking thing that even people trying to make Gone with the Wind today would probably never work with all the effects now. The way it was back then, it could never be made as magical as it is. And with Casablanca, they thought they were just making something really cheap that they were just going to throw into theaters and forget about. So I would say, and it's hard, like I said, it's hard to say because you can just put Casablanca on whenever you want. As Ebert said, just like a music album. Whereas Gone with the Wind, you really have to it's a real thing. So it's really hard to distinguish. But I would say between these two experiences, I think I slightly prefer Casablanca, but they both are totally, uphold their legacy.
Excuse me. We actually got an experience of watching it in a theater,
Yeah.
and it was quite incredible.
A couple of years ago, actually.
Yeah.
With the audience, too. It was great.
It was
actually
a sold-out show.
Yeah, we actually saw it the second time because they played it once for its anniversary, and then it was back by popular demand. So that was good. So that's another one of those ways where that's watching classic movies with an audience is amazing because you always kind of wonder how classic movies got a reaction when they first came out. And even though you're watching it in a full theater of people have already seen it, you still kind of have that same, like it's the first time reaction. So I highly recommend that if you ever get the chance. So that's hopefully Gone with the Wind isn't too far off. I know they play it.
75th anniversary, I believe, is this year. I think that's what we looked up.
Yeah, because it was 1939.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, if you know where to see it and close to anywhere in West Virginia and Ohio, let us know.
They do it, but it's, yeah. Yeah, no, usually it's not that, because that's one of those movies that's been long running for a while. I think it's like, when you take away everything and strew everything down, I think it's like considered the highest grossing movie of all time or something.
They actually said on that website, it was like a website basically talking about it showing all around the country at all different times. They stopped showing it until October because of the anniversary. So it makes me think that it's going to get a re-release this year, at the end of the year.
So I think that covers this.
So this is the quintessential verses when it comes to the romance genre. In 2 days, actually, we're doing another one. And should be an interesting one. And we're going to end our romance-themed verses on one of my favorite movies of all time. So that's going to be coming up soon. And then come March, we've got one more Oscar, and I do mean pun intended in this case, themed verses. And then we're going to go into Hodgepodge until October. So we've got a lot of stuff still to come. So just keep tuned in. And that's pretty much it. So AJ, any parting words?
I think that's it.